Afternoon, intuitives. Something was running around my head, and I wanted to get a video out and try to put it in the words the best I can. And while this topic doesn't necessarily have to do with narcissism or narcissistic abuse, there usually is overlap with this and narcissistic abuse, and it's certainly something that we as INFJs and ENFJs encounter in our lives, do not agree with, and often do what we can to try to change the system. And I'm talking about the system of the good old boys, as it's known here in America, or the old boys club across the pond. Now, what is that? Well, that's an institutionalized system that gives certain benefits and certain privileges to people based on things that are not of merit, like perhaps the family they were born into, if they're, a specific ethnic heritage, like here in America, a lot of it is if you're a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, which while I'm white, I'm not a WASP. I'm of Irish and Italian blood, so I'm not allowed in that club. Um, a lot of the times the old boys network will be heavily filled with nepotism and cronyism. I mean, and this is especially true in certain industries. And I've observed it quite a bit in the public sector, in the fire service, and elsewhere in the public sector when I've tried to apply for jobs to which I was qualified for over the years. And examples of this would be if, say, a county government is posting a job, and instead of interviewing people, uh, you know, John Bob's nephew wants the job. And even though, John Bob's nephew Goober isn't really qualified and he has a criminal record, the manager giving out the job likes John Bob. They're drinking buddies, they're hunting buddies. So that's good enough for him. So Goober gets the job and is incompetent at it. And this is a taxpayer funded job. We're not talking about how things work at a family business if business is owned by a certain family is hiring their own. I mean, I'm talking in the sense of the public sector, where the jobs are funded by taxpayer money. It's not any one family's privately owned company. Like these, public sector jobs existed before whoever is the supervisor, and it'll exist after he's gone too. They have no ownership of it, nor does anybody else. And INFJs and ENFJs, we're big on equal opportunity and a standard of fairness for anybody trying to enter any profession. Like, that for any profession, the person should be taken on merit, how they can perform the job, their education, past experiences, clean records, certifications, things like that. It shouldn't matter, who they are related to or if they're friends with certain people to get the hookup. Friends of mine have dealt with this quite a bit in the education industry, trying to become teachers, where there'll be jobs at high schools that won't even get posted, and it'll just be given to, like, one of the secretaries in the office's son, even though he's fresh out of college and has um, no substitute experience, no teaching experience at all. They won't even interview other candidates. The job was never even posted for other people to apply for. He solely got it because of who his mother is, and that's wrong. We see this in fiction too. In fiction, INFJs and ENFJ characters are often portrayed as those trying to change the status quo and create, a more fair, more meritocratic society, and also rip the mask off or expose certain clandestine elements who feel they have special privileges and the right to hide the truth. An example of that would be if anybody watched The X-Files back in the day, Fox Mulder, the main character, INFJ, whole life mission was to get the truth out about extraterrestrial life and expose the shadow government. More recently, anybody who watched Game of Thrones, the two main characters, Daenerys Targaryen, Jon Snow, both INFJs, both trying, to create a better system, both trying to break the wheel and, willing to use force when necessary, and always willing to stand up for the less advantaged and to call out, the corrupt system that existed in that fantasy world. And there's a lot of parallels to that, to the real world. I mean, take the United States in its current state. We're an oligarchy. Money talks, money rules, of the rich, by the rich, for the rich. Our politicians, by and large, only care about two types of people, and that is, their donors, the ones who buy them and give them money and keep them in their cushy jobs, and white middle class and up baby boomers. For some reason, they've seemed to be an anointed class their entire lives and get whatever they want, and the rest of us are just supposed to fall in line behind whatever they want because they are, and many of them view themselves as these demigod type figures. And it's ironic enough because that same class of people, the baby boomers, are the ones who made the system what it is today, made it less fair, made it, this either you're in it, it's a big club, either you're in it or you're not. Back in the day, when they were young adults, when their parents, the World War II generation, were still in charge by and large, it was a more fairer society. There was what was called the American dream or upward mobility. That's basically, non-existent in the United States today unless you happen to become an athlete, a musician, or an actor. By and large, you're stuck in, at best, the class you were born into. And that's what gives these new groups on both the left and the right trying to change the status quo, while the left and the right grassroots, basically agree that the status quo is broken. There's obviously difference of opinions on how to fix it on most issues. On some issues, we agree, like ending the wars, and in a lot of cases, with more protectionist trade policies and not having corporate socialism. But there's a lot of other disagreements. But by and large, the system that came into power in the 1980s under Reagan and then was kicked in the high gear by old Slick Willie himself with NAFTA is broken. It led to the crash of 2008. I'm not going to go deep into the specifics on this, but I want to talk about how it's interesting that those in charge of this system at times may admit its failures, but are doing everything they can to keep it as it is. This is just an example of a good old boys club or an old boys system, and those that are in that system and that club will use any means necessary, and usually narcissistic tactics, to ensure that nothing changes because they benefit from that system. And even though in most cases when someone's been in the system for a couple years, they're set for life, their children are set for life, that greed, that lust for power, that narcissism compels them to want to hold on to it at all costs. And they don't care what they have to do, who has to get screwed over, who has to suffer, as long as their ego is satisfied and they're continued, to have their influence and power, they'll keep things the way they are because all they care about is themselves, which is very dangerous in civil servants. And in my opinion, are not the people you want ruling, which is why INFJs and ENFJs were natural leaders in the stuff I read, and we are pretty altruistic as most humans can be, so we're natural leaders. If anybody out there, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but if anybody who listens to this is a follower of Christianity, a lot of psychologists who have studied the Bible agree that Christ, or the person of Christ or deity, however you want to see it, but the person that is represented in the Bible is an INFJ personality. It's pretty interesting when you think about it. And he himself was trying to reform the system of his day in the Bronze Age and create a more egalitarian meritocratic system. And that was the whole point of Christianity in the early days. It wasn't to start a new religion. It was supposed to be, and started as, a reformation of Second Temple Rabbinical Judaism, as Christ, or who Christ is represented as, in the Bible saw it. So, after my rambling about that, I should have a point, right? Well, and I do. INFJs and ENFJs, we have to, even at our own detriment, continue to call out the good old boys clubs and the old boys clubs. And even though it's frustrating, and even though change is very hard, what we can do is bring people's attention to it. And when you bring enough people's attention to it, things are bound to change. Maybe, probably not, change as much as we'd like them to change, but certainly some concessions will have to be made. And it's just fairness too. If there's corruption, it deserves to be called out. It deserves to be seen for what it is. It shouldn't be allowed to hide in the shadows simply, under the logic of, that's the way we've always done it, and it is what it is. So, continue to value your integrity and trust your intuition. And when you see an old boys club, call them out.